Christmas is a truly special time for so many people. It's a time for family and loved ones to exchange gifts and reflect on the year that's been. But it's also kind of about this guy. The idea and iconography of Santa Claus is such a massive part of today's cultural understanding of what Christmas is. From his workshop of elves, the 9 reindeer that propel him across the globe, to the time The Rock and Chris Evans had to rescue him from mercenaries, or whatever that movie was about. Santa plays a crucial role in how we interpret and understand Christmas, as well as how the entire festive period is marketed. The character of Santa has appeared in virtually every form of media over the past century, from seminal films like Miracle on 34th Street and Elf, to more recent entries like the aforementioned Red One, and even to a litany of comics and graphic novels. Jolly old Saint Nick is no stranger to the printed page, and has made numerous appearances in the worlds of Marvel, DC and beyond. These range from an encounter with the X-Men, battling Darkseid, being replaced by Doctor Doom, and even a new gritty origin story written by Grant Morrison. Given the holiday season is now firmly underway, I thought it would be fun to deep dive into some of these weird and wonderful Santa stories. So with that said, grab your eggnog and a box of celebrations as I, alongside a few special guests, explain the history of some fascinating Christmas themed comics, and consider what they can tell us about the often wacky and unusual relationship between Santa Claus and our favourite superheroes. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. This video will cover a variety of Christmas-themed comics from every era and generation of the medium, but for the sake of continuity, I want to start by looking at the humble beginnings of these festive fantasies, and examine how both Christmas and Santa were featured in the golden age of comics. The first example of a major superhero comic featuring an explicit Christmas-themed story came all the way back in 1940, when Jerry Siegel and Jack Burnley teamed up for the one-shot special Superman's Christmas Adventure. This comic opens in the Daily Planet office, as Perry White instructs Lois and Clark to find a suitable news story for the holidays. They pitch a toy drive to support vulnerable children, and the issue suddenly cuts to Santa Claus reading about their plans in the newspaper. This seems like a straightforward setup for the story, especially as we then see Superman encounter a young child from a wealthy family berating his butler over his gifts, with Clark showing the child how other children aren't as fortunate and trying to instill the true meaning of Christmas. But then things take a peculiar twist, as 2 greedy businessmen named Dr. Grouch and Mr. Meanie arrive at the North Pole with a proposition for Santa: quit his philanthropy and allow them to use his factory to make toys that they can sell. Santa naturally refuses, and the 2 men instead travel to the Daily Planet office and gatecrash the toy drive, setting the presents on fire and knocking everyone unconscious with a mysterious gas. As they exit, Lois manages to sneak into their plane and follows them back to the North Pole, where they try to wreak havoc at Santa's workshop. After discovering Lois, Dr. Grouch and Mr. Meanie tie her to a rocket and light it, only for Superman to arrive and thwart their plan. The 2 men flee from Superman and manage to steal a reindeer, causing Santa to plead with Clark to go and rescue it. He is able to save the animal, but upon returning to the North Pole, Santa claims that it won't be able to fly. Superman naturally offers to fly Santa around the world himself, as we see the pair deliver presents to children across the globe. Once they're done, Superman and Santa travel to Mr. Meanie and Dr. Grouch's house, only to discover the 2 men have changed their ways, with Santa even giving them a gift. Clark then reunites with Lois and flies back to Metropolis, where he witnesses the rich child from the start of the issue journeying out with his butler to deliver presents to the less fortunate. Superman then breaks the 4th wall and offers an important message to the reader, urging us to look after those around us and be generous to those in need during the holidays. Despite being a relatively short story, this comic is absolutely wild. It clearly takes some inspiration from classic Christmas tales such as Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but still manages to regain much of what readers had come to expect from a Superman story by this time. With it being Santa's first canonical appearance in the DC universe, and with the added wrinkle of it being written by Superman's co-creator Jerry Siegel, this heartfelt adventure remains a historically significant moment in the history of Christmas-themed comics, and unknowingly set a massive precedent for how these types of stories would be handled going forward. Although DC would publish another Superman Christmas adventure one-shot in 1944, the next story I'd like to touch on actually hit shelves 3 years later, when Siegel teamed with artist John Sakala for a special issue of Action Comics. And to explain this story, allow me to hand the video over to today's first special guest.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Owen. Happy holidays, everybody. My name is Troy from TroyBoy17. I'm going to be covering Action Comics number 105 from 1947. The story is titled The Man Who Hated Christmas. No, wait, not that guy, or that guy. There we go. The story starts and we're introduced to Jasper Rasper, a millionaire who hates all things Christmas or holidays. This is a story about an evil rich person, which if you know anything about me is very on brand for me. The first thing we see him do is fire his janitor of 30 years who has a family and an orphaned grandchild to take care of, all because he told him Merry Christmas. So really off to a good start with this guy. Rasper hates the holidays so much that he wants to sabotage Christmas. So he flies to the North Pole with some chemically altered chocolates to give to Santa Claus. We see the janitor that he fired telling the landlord that he can't pay rent, and so she goes to the Daily Planet to tell Perry White about what happened. Perry says, "Oh my god, I am so sorry. But also, this could make for some really good content," and so he puts Clark Kent on the case. Rasper shows up at Santa's door and is apparently just like allowed in. I guess you can just like walk into the workshop, like no problem. And he gives Santa these special chocolates that his company created. Santa eats them and they make him fall asleep, and when Superman shows up, he's now twice the size that he used to be, meaning that he can't fit down the chimneys anymore. A diabolically clever plot. So Superman gives him a crazy montage to help him lose weight in time for Christmas. Not with a healthy diet or exercise, no, of course not, but instead by traumatizing Santa. He literally bullies him by like dunking him in ice water and like flying him through a volcano and almost making him get hit by a meteor to scare the pounds off of him. Not sure if that's how weight loss works, but whatever. But somehow it works and Santa's weight goes back to how it was before. But Rasper also poisoned Santa's reindeer. They'll be okay after a couple days, but now nobody's able to pull Santa's sleigh to deliver his presents. If only there was someone we knew that was like super strong and could fly faster than a speeding bullet. Oh, well, I guess Christmas is canceled. But wait, Superman is able to help pull a sleigh, and as they're leaving, they see Rasper and his helicopter stranded on a block of ice. Despite how genuinely horrible he is as a person, they still swoop down and save his life just in time. And we learn the reason that Rasper hates Christmas so much is that he earned his riches because he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and worked for it. And he thinks the woke mind virus of gift giving is making young people lazy. In so many words. That's basically what he's saying. But now, after Santa and Superman saved his life and made it about him, that's given him a new look on the holiday. So they fly him back home, he rehires his janitor, the landlord won the Daily Planet contest and is keeping all the money for herself, and Christmas is saved. There's always something so fun about Golden Age Superman stories, especially the ones by Siegel and Schuster, and I think even this late into their career, they were still pushing Superman stories touting Superman as the champion of the oppressed, at least in some fashion. You know, focusing on the working class people that were directly impacted by this crazy rich person. I don't think they really understood how weight loss works though. That's the end of my segment. I don't know how to do collabs naturally, like organically, because I don't do them very often, so Back to you, Owen.
While DC published many of the earliest examples of Christmas comics, they weren't the only company to tell these types of stories. We'll touch on two other examples of popular non-superhero comics from the 1940s shortly, but it's worth noting that Marvel themselves did publish a number of festive funnies too. The first Marvel comic to feature Santa came a decade after the Distinguished competition, in November 1954's Strange Tales issue 34. It's worth noting that during this period, Marvel, or Atlas Comics as they were then known, had largely moved away from publishing superhero comics, favouring anthology books that featured horror, crime, and romance stories. Nevertheless, this issue is noteworthy as it contains Marvel's first Christmas comic, and established a tradition the company would still follow today. Within this comic, there contains the 5-page story Moment of Glory, which focuses on the down-on-his-luck Sammy Glenn. Here, we learn that Sammy was formerly an engineer, but circumstances led him to now work as a car attendant. One day, he encounters an old colleague at the garage who makes him reflect on his past. He realises that he's been too kind and allowed the world to take advantage of him. After this, a flashy and expensive car arrives at the garage, and Sammy takes it for a spin to impress his former co-workers. Donning a suit, Sammy drives outside his old workplace and flaunts his apparent success. However, he quickly realises that many of his former friends have also fell on hard times. Sammy, feeling humbled, instead journeys to a nearby bar, where a rich woman gives him her number and a local businessman offers him a job. Sammy returns to the garage and ponders on what could have caused his fortune to dramatically change, as the comic reveals today's date is December 25th. The final page sees the car's owner collect the vehicle, and it's revealed to be none other than Santa Claus, who drives away, giving this unfortunate soul an unlikely but much needed gift. Whereas the Christmas stories published by DC up until this point all featured a more traditional Santa interacting with the company's superheroes, Marvel's first foray into festive tales is utterly bizarre in comparison. As the company began reintroducing their superhero universe in the early 1960s though, their next Christmas specials would adopt a more similar approach to DC. But before we dive into those, I'd be remiss to not spotlight some other popular Santa-themed comics from this period. So here's Chris from Comic Tropes to break down the history of Dell Comics' Santa Claus Funnies, followed by Matt Draper's dive into the world of Donald Duck, to spotlight Carl Banks' classic 1949 story, Letter to Santa.
Hello, viewers of Owen Likes Comics. My name is Chris. I host a comic book review channel called Comic Tropes, and I'm a big fan of the work that Owen does. So when he reached out to me to say, do I have a Christmas comic I could talk about, I jumped at the chance. I want to talk to you about one that I discovered in my 30s, although it was much older. Santa Claus Funnies. Although there's a little bit more nuance to the name. Let me get into it. Dell Comics was at one point the biggest thing in comics. They were one of the earliest from the Golden Age. They went through the Silver Age. And one of the books they had, their longest running book, and the longest running American comic still, was 4-Color, sometimes known as 4-Color Comics. It was an anthology title. It came out every month, and it would feature a different character. Initially, they licensed a lot of comic strip characters. Dick Tracy, Alley-Oop, Tilly the Toiler. And eventually, Dell got to be the biggest thing. They licensed the characters from Disney and also from, Warner Brothers, the Looney Tunes characters. A lot of those Disney comics, pretty darn famous. You've seen Carl Barks' Donald Duck comics. Well, Dell was the company that originally published that. One of the things they published in 4-Color Funnies, and again, this had over 1,300 issues. Action Comics will probably pass it at some point, but for now, 4-Color. Every year, they would publish a book called Santa Claus Funnies in that title. And it was always a mix of different types of Christmas stories. You might get some cute animal stuff. You might get a funny story about Santa Claus going on an adventure. You'd probably get like a page or two giving you something a little more related to the actual Christian holiday. You might even get liner music, all with gorgeous illustrations. Really beautiful. If I'm going to recommend a place for you to start, I recommend looking up the Walt Kelly issues of Santa Claus Funnies, which fortunately they keep reprinted. Lots of people have gotten the rights. And if you don't want to go out and buy a copy, guess what? It's in the public domain. So if you go to Comic Book Plus, they host a lot of public domain Golden Age stuff, and you can look up Walt Kelly Santa Claus Funnies. Walt Kelly, who's he? A brilliant illustrator. Got started in his early 20s working on Donald Duck animation at Walt Disney Studios, and then while still in his 20s, like around age 28, he started working for Dell. And while at Dell, Walt Kelly created Pogo. You may have come across Pogo if you read Sunday Comics, for instance. It's still published, at least in reprints. Really funny talking animal stuff. He had a gorgeous style. He wrote in dialogue that would have Southern patois and twang written out into the dialogue. It was funny, it was adorable, and it still remains an influence to artists today. I think if you look at artists like Jeff Smith from Bone, if you look at Frank Cho, these are guys that were influenced by Walt Kelly, and his stories with Santa Claus are absolutely charming, pardon my stutter, and I strongly recommend looking them up. I think that they have some brilliant art, they're really cute, and they get you in the holiday spirit. It also takes you down a cool historical path where you might want to learn more about either Walt Kelly or Dell Comics, because there's a lot of history there. But that's my recommendation. Santa Claus Funnies, published within 4-color by Dell. Thanks for the opportunity, Owen. Merry Christmas, everybody.
In the long and wonderful history of Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics, Christmas plays a crucial role. After all, it was in the story Christmas on Bear Mountain where creator Carl Barks first had Scrooge McDuck appear and forever changed the lives of Donald, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. An appropriate setting for the world's only good billionaire, and a character named after the star of one of the most famous Christmas stories ever made. From there, Christmas was a recurring setting in both Barks' stories and in those made by the many who followed, including Don Rosa. And over time, these Disney comics became synonymous with the holiday season in stories of both hardship and generosity. But this is a video about Santa Claus comics, and it's in the pages of Letter to Santa, written and drawn by Carl Barks for Walt Disney's Christmas Parade #1 in 1949, that we first meet the true blue Santa Claus. It all takes place on Christmas Eve as Donald, entertaining the boys by watching a giant steam shovel, realizes he never mailed their letter to old St. Nick, and now the boys won't get what they wanted, specifically one of those steam shovels. Cue panic and Donald begging Scrooge to buy one of those giant machines for the boys, and when he does, the old miser decides that he should get the credit, not Santa. Of course, the only reasonable outcome is a steam shovel duel, competing fake Santas, and the eventual arrival of the real deal, who seems to be the only human in this universe and, even more disturbing, can change his size to slide down chimneys. But everything turns out alright in the end, at least for the boys, in a story all about the sheer panic the holidays can cause, and the lengths we go to for the people we love. Even old Uncle Scrooge, a much meaner and cheaper fella in Barks comics than in DuckTales or other interpretations, is willing to help in the spirit of Christmas. But it's Santa who saves the day, as the only rational one here, giving the boys the toy machine they really wanted. For anyone wanting a little holiday fun, or to understand the genius of Carl Barks and the Disney Ducks, Letter to Santa is a pure delight.
As Marvel Comics began their superhero renaissance in the 1960s, a new slew of popular superheroes emerged and quickly became household names, with perhaps two of the greatest successes of this era being Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Even though these characters had crossed over numerous times during the 1960s, in 1971 Marvel brought them together as part of a brand new series entitled Marvel Team Up. This book was designed to spotlight one-off encounters between heroes from different corners of the company's universe, and its debut issue just so happens to feature a Christmas story that is both incredibly sincere and surprisingly important in the history of these characters. Written by Roy Thomas with art by Ross Andrew, the comic opens with Peter Parker working as a photographer and covering a Christmas swim contest. Suddenly though, the swimmers are attacked as the water turns to sand, and Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, appears. The police struggle to detain Sandman, forcing Peter to suit up and fight the villain. Spider-Man is able to hold his own against Flint, but the Sandman eventually escapes. Eager to trace his whereabouts, Peter goes to the Baxter Building to seek help from the Fantastic Four, but finds Johnny Storm there alone. Johnny agrees to help Peter take down the Sandman though, and the two men bond over their personal problems before the holidays. Using the Fantasticar, they survey the entire city for Marko, but instead find a group of thieves stealing Christmas presents from Misty Knight, causing Spider-Man and the Human Torch to intervene and help her. After this, they do manage to find the Sandman, but are overwhelmed when he transforms into a living sandstorm. Peter and Johnny then end up trapped inside a water tower and have to work together to escape. When they do, they chase after Sandman as he enters a nearby building, only to learn the reason why Flint has resurfaced is to visit his elderly mother for Christmas. Realising that Flint's mother has no idea about his criminal background, the two heroes agree to let him share this important moment with his mom, under the condition that he surrenders and returns to prison afterwards. Eventually, Johnny and Peter enter the apartment to take Sandman away. However, they discover the elderly woman alone and Flint having seemingly disappeared. Nevertheless, this experience brings these two heroes closer together as they swing and fly home excited to spend Christmas with their friends and family. Although this story doesn't include Santa directly, I still think it's an incredibly sweet and noteworthy Christmas story, as well as one that establishes the long-running friendship between Spider-Man and the Human Torch that is still a part of both characters today. It also tells a fairly earnest and humble story about the Sandman, even with its twist ending in mind, demonstrating the humanity and compassion that the festive period reminds us to have. Switching gears back to DC though, the next story I'd like to spotlight is Wanted Santa Claus Dead or Alive from DC Special Series number 21, published December 1979. And to go over this issue, here's YouTube's resident Batman expert, Salazar Knight.
Christmas and Batman are a perfect match, just as perfect as Batman and Robin, or the Waynes and Crime Alley. But as far as perfect matches go, it doesn't get any better than the creative team behind Wanted, Santa Claus, Dead or Alive. This Christmas special was published in December of 1979, and the story follows a relentless Batman who refuses to take a break, not even on Christmas Eve. And as it turns out, he's right, because crime never takes days off in Gotham. The story begins with Batman crashing into an underground Christmas party to interrogate a notorious gangster about a mysterious boat waiting at the Gotham harbor. This man tells Batman it's all a favor for a former cellmate called Boomer, a man who Batman thought had gone straight. Disappointed, Batman starts looking for Boomer and goes undercover into a homeless shelter, where he learns that Boomer has taken a job as a department store Santa Claus. Expecting the worst, Batman hurries to the place, but first he donates $1,000 to the shelter, which doesn't seem much in 2024, but back in 1979 that was roughly $4,000 in today's money, proving that Batman really is the only good millionaire. In the meantime, Boomer is having a rough time, because as much as he honestly enjoyed being Santa, he was actually forced to do it by other more dangerous criminals, who now want to use him to break into the store. Only at the last minute, Boomer gets enough courage to fight the criminals, but he fails. Fortunately, Batman arrives just in time to fight the bad guys, taking out two of them but forcing the last one to escape outside, where he gets ready to kill Santa. In the darkness of the night, Batman is unable to find them, until out of nowhere, a light starts shining bright. A light coming through the empty hole left by the missing Christmas star of a big nativity scene. A light that points Batman to the location of the last bad guy, and as Boomer is saved by Batman, the bright light vanishes, the star disappears, and the silent night is saved by the Dark Knight. Holy Christmas miracles, Batman. This is definitely one of the most iconic Batman Christmas specials, because like I said before, the creative team behind it was a perfect match, as this was the first collaboration between the legendary Batman creators Frank Miller and Denny O'Neil. As a matter of fact, this is the very first Batman story illustrated by Frank Miller, when he was barely in his early 20s, and quite frankly, it shows. His art in this story is a bit rough around the edges, and it is still a far cry from his definitive style that he would develop only a few years later. Nevertheless, Miller's lack of experience was compensated by the expert hand of Denny O'Neil, who had already defined the character of Batman for the best part of that decade. And as fate would have it, this is also one of O'Neil's last Batman stories before he leaves DC Comics for Marvel in the early 1980s. And so the Batman Christmas special of 1979 becomes more than just a holiday celebration. It becomes the final 1970s story by the writer that defined Batman in that decade, and the first story by the artist that will define Batman in the next one. And that is the real Christmas miracle. Now before I go, I want to give a massive thanks to Owen for putting all of this together. This has been Salazar Knight, your favorite Batman YouTuber, wishing you all a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Batty New Year.
In 1985, the duo of Peter David and Mark Beecham teamed up to tell a Christmas-themed adventure in the pages of Spectacular Spider-Man issue 112. This story, entitled You Never Make a Sound, finally shows the web-slinger encountering Santa, but not necessarily in the way you might expect. The issue begins on Christmas Eve, as Spider-Man patrols New York City, encountering a burglar who steals presents from underneath a woman's arm. We quickly realise that Peter isn't in the festive spirit this year, jaded by the recent death of Police Captain Gene DeWolf. He then goes to the Daily Bugle, where they explain they have no assignments for him over the holidays, with a rejected Peter leaving before his colleague Joe Robertson can invite him over to catch up with his son Robbie. Peter swings through the city and laments his frustrations, feeling isolated and unwanted over Christmas. Meanwhile, we see a child visiting a mall Santa who begins to ask unusual questions about the child's home address and family. That night, the child's apartment is burgled by the Santa impersonator, who, when caught, pulls a gun out on the mother. This triggers Peter's spider sense and he crashes through the window to confront the burglar. In all of the commotion though, Spider-Man fails to catch the criminal and he escapes to the roof. Here, he's met by a shocking sight as the real Santa Claus stands before him. By the time Peter arrives on the roof, neither men are there. However, he gets a call from the Bugle the next day, explaining that an unnamed criminal turned himself in late last night and under NYPD supervision, volunteered to give out handmade toys to the city's children. Peter is understandably shocked and goes to photograph the event, only for the thief to seemingly recognize him and hand him a note. The comic then cuts to Christmas Day, where Peter is surrounded by his close friends and family, embracing Mary Jane and allowing his insecurities and anxieties to halt for just one day. This story is excellent, both for its role as an endearing Christmas adventure and for being a terrific one-shot Spidey tale, published during a real high point in the character's history. It's one of the first examples of a comic subverting fans' expectations of Santa, this time in the form of a sinister imposter, later confronted by the real version, and featured a cover that remains one of the most iconic of any festive-themed issue ever. Marvel continued to play with fans' expectations of Santa in 1989, when the character appeared in the pages of Sensational She-Hulk number 8. Written and drawn by John Byrne, this comic focuses on She-Hulk taking on a new case to prosecute a serial killer, only to find a lack of credible evidence to prosecute him. With merely days before the trial, Jen scrambles for information before she's contacted by a mysterious man named Nick St. Christopher. Jen meets with Nick, where he explains that he has a gift of figuring out who is naughty or nice, with She-Hulk reluctantly agreeing to let Nick help her on the case. We then see Nick break into a house belonging to the defendant via the chimney, and once inside, he and Jen search the property for evidence that can pin him to the crimes. Despite Jen requesting a search warrant on the building, the ensuing trial doesn't go as She-Hulk had hoped, with the evidence they found not being enough to sway the judge or the jury. With all hope seemingly lost, Nick teleports him and Jen to Australia, where they locate the killer's ex-girlfriend, who agrees to testify against him. Back in New York, Jen presents this new information to the judge, who agrees to restart the trial. Later, she thanks Nick for his help before questioning his motives and identity, only for Nick's wife to suddenly appear and scold him for his escapades. Nick leaves behind a present for Jen, later revealed in issue 36 to be the ability to transform back into human form, which she uses to visit her father over the holidays. This story follows Marvel's long-standing tradition of telling utterly peculiar and bizarre Christmas stories. It feels more akin to the output in the 1950s than the Spider-Man comic we just discussed. With that said though, this was a fun and entertaining story that painted Santa in a very unique light, treating him as a more playful and mischievous figure who delivers some much needed help in his own unusual way. Although this issue doesn't outright confirm that Nick St. Christopher is indeed Santa, Marvel would later canonize it as such, meaning that following his encounter with the burglar in Spectacular Spider-Man, his next stop was to help She-Hulk on her case. Santa would return to the Marvel Universe the next year though, when in the pages of What the Issue 10, the team of Scott Lobdell and John Byrne imagined a scenario in which Kris Kringle would be shockingly replaced by none other than Doctor Doom. And to explain this further, here's Evan from the appropriately named channel, Evan Von Doom.
Ho ho ho, and a happy generic holidays to whatever you guys are celebrating. I'm Evan Von Doom from everywhere, and I'm here to talk about a little story called I'll Be Doomed for Christmas, a Yuletide fable by Scott Lobdell and John Byrne. And when Owen approached me, he said, "Oi, mate, you could take a picklet of whatever you want." That's the best I can do. So I looked through the list and, wouldn't you know it, the Doctor Doom Christmas story was on the list. And I thought to myself, shouldn't the biggest Doctor Doom fan do the Doctor Doom Christmas story? And if I'm not the biggest Doctor Doom fan, may God strike me down right now. Do not read into that. Our story begins before the story even begins. Marvel relaunched its What If series in the late 80s to pretty good success. At the same time, Mad Magazine was having a very popular rise in the early 90s, and Marvel looked at these two things and said, wait a minute. Enter What The, a spoof series of What If. If you're not familiar with what If is, that's hard to say. What If was a series by Marvel that looked at popular events that happened during Marvel history and said, what if things were different? Stories of things that you would never imagine, like what if Spider-Man joined the Avengers? Or what if Jane Foster lifted the hammer of Thor? I know, try to stay with me. The 10th issue of What The has multiple stories in it, but the one we've been focusing on is I'll Be Doomed for Christmas, which is arguably the most famous one of the entire run, I would say. And it begins like this. We join Dr. Doom on Christmas Eve when he's suddenly awakened by a clanging noise. He goes outside to find jolly old Saint Nick himself trapped in a giant bear trap. Dr. Doom's a very smart guy. You would think he would have some different type of defense, but it's very effective and it decommissions the old man for the night. So he reaches out to Dr. Doom and says, I need you to go and deliver my presents for me. And if you do, I'll give you whatever your heart desires. Now, thinking about Dr. Doom, whatever his heart desires could be anything. It could be a giant death ray. It could be the revival of his dead mom. It could be total world domination. So Dr. Doom dons a red and white suit and declares himself Santa Doom. And his first stop is the Avengers Tower. He goes there and drops off a bunch of gifts, and he's kind of jealous to see that the Avengers give their villains gifts, and the Fantastic Four never sent Dr. Doom a gift. Like, what's up with that? And as he's leaving, the Avengers notice him and say, hey, what's he doing? And they follow him straight to the fourplex. Dr. Doom enters the Baxter building and drops off the presents when suddenly the Fantastic Four arrive. Seeing Dr. Doom sneak around their house, they immediately say, yeah, let's kick this guy's ass. I mean, this guy was just delivering gifts and you jumped his ass? I think that's a little excessive, for heroes. So now he's getting jumped by the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, and he says, you know what? Screw all this niceties, I'm about to pop off. They're rolling around the dirt like dogs when suddenly they hear a small, weakly voice. Excuse me, sir. I'm a little orphan then. And I'm sickly. So the kids are curious, why is Santa fighting these heroes? This can't be right. And Dr. Doom, quick on his feet, says, oh no, don't worry, these guys are my helpers. So Santa Doom, the Fantastic Four, and Avengers help pass out gifts to all these sickly orphans. And as Dr. Doom cuddles the little Whovian girl up, she says, I love you, Santa. And with that, Santa says, I'll grant you your wish now, whatever it may be. But Dr. Doom says, nah, I'm good. I got everything I needed. And as Santa goes off into the night wondering what that could possibly be, we see a smiling Doom holding a small teddy bear. Now, I hate to give John Byrne praise, but I love this story. It's very nice, very cute, very quick, and exactly what you need for the holidays. And it really just goes to show you can excuse any war crime if you dress up as Santa one time. And now back to Owen in the studio.
If you thought Doctor Doom becoming Santa was a bold creative swing, Marvel would try and up the ante the following year. In 1991's Marvel Holiday Special, Scott Lobdell and Dave Cockrum crafted a story entitled A Miracle a Few Blocks Down from 34th Street, which sees Santa caught in the crossfire of the X-Men's war with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and even resulted in a massive revelation about the festive icon. This story takes place several years before the then present day X-Men comics, during the heyday of Chris Claremont's time writing the series. Here we open to the X-Men working together to decorate a Christmas tree, with everyone but Wolverine taking part. The festivities are interrupted as they receive an alert from Cerebro, stating that it's found a mutant in the centre of New York, and it's one of the most powerful it's ever recorded. As such, the X-Men go to the Rockefeller Center to track down the mutant, only to find their arch enemies, the Brotherhood, there instead. The two teams begin to fight, until the Brotherhood are suddenly transformed into toys by a shrouded figure, soon revealed to be Santa Claus. Realizing this is the mutant they're looking for, the X-Men approach Santa and ask him about his powers, learning that he is indeed a mutant. Santa refuses their invitation to join the X-Men though, reminding them of his important duties during the holidays. As a parting gift though, Santa teleports them to a nearby ice rink, and summons snow to make it feel even more like Christmas. The X-Men reunite with Cyclops and Jean, who are already out skating, as the comic reveals Santa has wiped their memories, leaving his secret still intact. While I've read a lot of different Christmas themed comics when making this video, this story from the 1991 Marvel Holiday Special is honestly one of my favourites. It really captures the spirit and feel of those classic Claremont era X-Men comics, aided by Dave Cockrum's excellent artwork, and fits in with that time period perfectly despite being a silly crossover with Santa. It's playful, funny and charming, and complements the team's existing lore, all while giving us a more faithful and sincere cavalier take on Santa than Marvel usually published in this period. But while Marvel decided to give us a more earnest take on Santa, DC responded with their own story in 1992 that took the exact opposite approach, telling a Christmas adventure that broke almost every conceivable rule about how these stories are written, while still being undoubtedly one of the most fondly remembered festive comics ever published. This is the Lobo Paramilitary Christmas Special, and here's the brilliant Mullet Man Comics to tell you more about it.
Thank you for having me on the video, Owen, and giving me the chance to redeem myself from my horrendous Lobo video by giving it another and much better once-over. Now, the story I'll be going over for y'all is called the Lobo Paramilitary Christmas Special. Now, this grim Christmas special opens with parents angered at the reality that they won't be able to provide their children with a Merry Christmas, and in a sort of deranged fashion, convince themselves that all of their children will up and kill them because of it. So, they work out a plan to kill their children to save themselves. That is until a book floats down to their house with the exclamation that if you tell this story to your kids of how Lobo ruined Christmas, it will convince them to hate the holidays forever. The parents think it's a bunch of hogwash, but anything is better than killing your kids, right? So reading the tale, Lobo is hired by a begrudged Easter bunny to hunt down and kill Santa Claus. The story from then on becomes a ballet of violence, as Lobo kills elf after elf more brutal than the last. Standing atop of a mountain of dead elves, it all comes to a close in a climactic showdown between Lobo and a miserable Santa Claus that has grown to hate Christmas, ending in Santa's decapitation. Lobo then seeks to give out presents in Santa's stead, only instead of toys, the presents are weapons of mass destruction, ending the tale with Lobo turning Christmas from a day of joy into a day of unending horror and misery. Closing the book, the parents think that this will do the job on their kids, only the book, funnily enough, came with a one read per use spell poofing away, in which the parents ultimately commit to their plan previously, as the story concludes with the father, let's just say, putting his kids to rest, if you get what I mean. I should also add, because it's certainly worth mentioning, that this comic was made into a live action short, and it's everything you'd think it'd be and more.
Say, don't I recognize you from someplace?
Yes, I'm the fucking Easter Bunny!
But with that, Merry Christmas everyone, and thank you again, Owen, for having me in the video. I appreciate it.
In the final section of this video, I want to touch on some great Christmas-themed comics published in more recent years. Firstly, in lieu of Ron V and Evan Cagle's The New Gods issue 1 that released last week, here's Kirby from Comic Krackle to tell you all about DC Holiday Bash number 2, a comic that sees Santa make the treacherous journey all the way to Apocalypse to confront Darkseid himself.
Thanks for having me, Owen. I'm Kirby from Comic Krackle. When Owen reached out, he gave me a list of potential stories to cover, and as it might be overly apparent, I'm kind of a fan of Jack Kirby's work. So I immediately jumped on the opportunity to talk about Santa infiltrating Apocalypse. The story was released in 1997 within the pages of DC Universe Holiday Special number 2. It was written and illustrated by Ty Templeton. You might be familiar with Templeton's work, as he worked on comics, writing and illustrating stories set within the DC animated universe. In this story, we start off on Apocalypse, having parademons consult Darkseid, letting him know of this omnipotent presence that's bypassing all of their forces. Not only is this presence dismantling satellites, but also avoiding their ground troops, as well as their missile defenses. Darkseid then asks if this presence was able to make it to the planet's surface, and the parademon responds, "It's worse. He's in this room." It then cuts to Santa in an outfit riddled with battle damage. He laments to Darkseid that this is a yearly occurrence, and like every year previously, Darkseid didn't make it easy on him. He says a job's gotta get done, and that job is checking off the naughty list and giving Darkseid his much needed lump of coal. As soon as he's able to do this, he turns and runs away, with Darkseid saying, "Do not let him leave here alive." And as Santa's almost out of the frame, he says, "Oops, gotta go. See you next year." So this story begs some questions. Is Santa a new god? Does the fourth world celebrate Christmas? Is Santa the key for the struggle between life and anti-life? I guess we're gonna have to wait for Rom V and Evan Cagle's The New Gods to see if he's canonized within the Pantheon. Now that I'm having an existential crisis regarding the hierarchy of the DC universe, I'm gonna go ahead and send it back to Owen.
Keeping up the focus on DC for a moment, in 2002 the duo of Mark Waid and Cliff Rathbun teamed up to tell an excellent Christmas one-shot in the pages of JLA issue 60. This story is centered around Plastic Man, telling the tale about when the Justice League first encountered Santa. And here's Sasha from Casually Comics to break it down for you.
Greetings, Owen and comic lovers. I'm Sasha from Casually Comics, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk about Santa in the DC Universe. This story is no Superman spanking Santa to get him in shape, but it's still entertaining. We're going to take a look at JLA number 60 from the year 2002. This was written by Mark Waid with art by Cliff Rayburn, Paul Neary on inks, and David Barron on colors. The story is "'Twas the Fight Before Christmas," but don't worry, it doesn't all rhyme, unless you wanted it to, then I'm sorry. This story is narrated by Plastic Man, who is trying to convince the son of his sidekick's sister that Santa is real. The sidekick is Woozy Winks. It's a deep cut because Plastic Man and Woozy have been around since the Golden Age. They're being back in Police Comics as Quality Comics characters. Now in this outing, Plaz weaves the tale of the Justice League already seeking to add Santa to their roster when a gingerbread man, looking more like a gingerdead man, comes to tell them that Santa has been captured by Neron, who is trying to usurp Christmas by giving gifts in exchange for something. Perhaps a meta commentary of some kind. So since Neron is DC's devil in some ways, this is basically Santa versus Satan. There are a lot of jokes in this story about a bunch of the concepts. It's very much having fun with it. For example, Plastic Man eats the messenger. I guess it's fine. They only say not to shoot them. Lots of the humor is derived from the child constantly questioning how the events are unfolding, or noting that they don't make sense. Very much a commentary, or at least play on comic fans. It also places the question out there, how reliable of a narrator is Plastic Man when Santa comes to confront Neron with heat vision, for example. Now while the Justice League do go to save Santa, they are turned into coal, and so Santa has to save the day and defeat Neron with gift giving. And that's how Santa joined the JLA, maybe. But as always, it's shown that Santa is indeed real in the DC universe, as he scoffs at the idea of having heat vision. This after watching Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner, and Martian Manhunter prank Plastic Man. It's a cute story and a fun interlude, full of lots of little jokes, both when it comes to the holiday and with the DC characters and their lore. This is yet another DC outing that plays with the supernatural elements to Santa, while also wrapping it up in a bit of a tall tale format. This is the kind of issue that one can just read on its own and get some enjoyment out of. It's also always nice to see some love for Plaz. But this was far from the end of Santa's time at DC, and Owen will take you further along on that journey. Thanks for having me.
One of my favourite Christmas comics that I always seem to come back to is from 2006's DC Infinite Holiday Special. This is an anthology featuring a ton of great short stories, but my personal favourite is Kelly Puckett and Pete Woods' Yes, Tyrone, There is a Santa Claus. This story is framed around a small child named Tyrone who writes a letter to the Daily Planet questioning the existence of Santa. Upon reading the letter, Clark feels emboldened to prove Santa's existence by dressing himself up and delivering presents to the boy's home. So in the early hours of Christmas morning, he flies across Metropolis to Tyrone's house, only to bump into Batman on the way. Ever the Scrooge, Bruce scoffs at Superman's idea and calls it pathetic, noting how his memories of Christmas are all somber due to the death of his parents. Clark leaves and is visibly upset by Batman's comments, but he still delivers the presents that he made for Tyrone, just no longer wearing his custom Santa outfit. When he arrives though, he finds a shocking sight. Tyrone, his sister and parents all stood in awe as Batman comes down the chimney, holding gifts and wearing his own Santa suit. Superman stands in the doorway bemused as Bruce embraces the children and cheekily gives Clark a wink as the comic ends. Heading back to Marvel for the next entry, and this issue has a premise that honestly sounds completely unbelievable. As part of the company's digital holiday special in 2008, Brian Reed and Val Zemeckis imagined what would happen if jolly old Saint Nick somehow wielded the Infinity Gauntlet. Now this is only a short 2-page story, but its premise is so outlandish and entertaining that I had to include it. The comic begins in the heat of action as Santa wears the Infinity Gauntlet and challenges the Illuminati to come and take it from him. We then cut back to earlier that day where it's explained that the heroes were summoned to solve a problem. Santa can't make his deliveries across the globe as his reindeers have been replaced by Skrulls. Brainstorming different ways to help, the heroes choose to collect the Infinity Gems and offer them to Santa as a one-time deal, allowing him to use their abilities to power his sleigh. Upon assembling the gauntlet though, the immense power of the gems has an adverse reaction on Santa, and he seemingly becomes mad and attacks the Illuminati. Eventually, Namor strikes Santa with a snowball, knocking him down and enabling Mr. Fantastic to retrieve the gauntlet. Once Santa comes to, he finds the heroes all stood over him, who explain his erratic behaviour. Santa apologises and laments that now he won't be able to deliver presents, until Tony Stark reveals that he'd already devised a plan B, showing off 5 robotic reindeers made from the same technology as his Iron Man suits. Santa boards his sleigh and with the reindeers in tow leaves, as our heroes watch him propel into the night sky, having saved Christmas in the most unlikely of ways. Next up, I want to highlight the most recent festive themed comic on this list, Batman Santa Claus Silent Night. Conveniently, when putting this video together, I learned that friend of the channel Comic Drake was already working on a dedicated video about this story, so I asked him to stop by and give us an overview of it.
Batman Santa Claus Silent Night by Jeff Parker and Michele Bandini is a really simple comic, but it more than makes up for it in pure charm. The Krampus is unleashing monsters all over the world, so Batman gets help from an old friend that he met during his travels, Santa Claus. And after years of DC going back and forth on what they were going to do with this character, they finally cemented him in canon as a Norse craftsman warrior. But also, Santa's kind of presented as like the first superhero. He's got a base, powers, equipment, and even an elf that kind of works as his Alfred. He has devoted his life to saving others from monstrous threats and punishing the wicked. But most importantly, Santa serves as an inspiration to others. Hands down, the best scene is when Superman flies in with a heartbroken face because Bruce never mentioned that he knew Santa, and because Santa Claus is to Clark Kent what Superman is to the rest of the world, it's a ton of fun to watch the Man of Steel turn into a child whenever he's in the presence of old Saint Nick. And another detail that I love is that every time that Santa meets a superhero, he recites their childhood addresses and what they asked for Christmas. But this goes even deeper for diehard comic fans like myself, because these addresses are actually references to characters when they made their first appearances. Like 1964 Foxhawk Lane alludes to Zatanna's first appearance in Hawkman #4 in 1964, written by Gardner Fox. Silent Night is a comic that is chock full of heart, and Jeff Parker really seems to get who these characters are. Like, of course Barbara Gordon wanted a complete set of Nancy Drew books as a kid. Of course a young Clark Kent wouldn't ask for presents for himself, but instead a new coffee maker for Ma and Pa Kent. And all of this hits home extra hard with Bandini's fantastic art and with how expressive he makes the characters. When Zatanna and Superman look at Santa, their admiration for him radiates off of the page, and I'm honestly a little upset that Krampus is a villain here, because this design is instantly iconic and would be perfect for an antagonist in an ongoing series. It's also legitimately really funny, and I'm truly impressed at how Parker was able to perfectly balance the action, humor, and sentimentality while also throwing in a deep backstory for Santa the Krampus traveling the world as wandering monster hunters before they were torn apart due to miscommunication. And plus, the comic also somehow manages to work in interesting connections to the larger DC universe, like Santa banishing creatures to the Phantom Zone, and Krampus only being able to escape from it due to the fabric of reality being torn during the Night Terrors event. Even though the general conflict is pretty generic and bare bones, the simplicity actually manages to enhance the end product, because it gives more spotlight to the individual character moments that make it special in the first place. Like seriously, it's only 4 issues long, but it feels so much bigger because of how jam-packed it is, while also not feeling bloated. And much like Damian grows from not believing in Santa Claus to being really excited to join him for a sleigh ride and deliver presents alongside him on Christmas Eve, Silent Night is bound to fill you with that Christmas spirit and remind you why this is the most wonderful time of the year.
And last but certainly not least, I want to talk about my current favourite Santa-themed comic. It isn't from Marvel, DC, or any other company we've looked at so far. Instead, it was published by Boom Studios back in 2015, written and drawn by the all-star duo of Grant Morrison and Dan Mora. Klaus is fantastic. When first pitched, Morrison conceived the series as akin to stories like All-Star Superman and Batman Year One, taking the quintessential elements of these pop culture icons and distilling them down to their purest purest form, and using that approach to tell a superhero-like origin story for Santa Claus. The Klaus we're introduced to at the start of this series is barely recognisable. Instead of a jolly grey-haired man in a red outfit, he's a hardened warrior in 17th century Europe, armed with deadly weapons and a wolf companion. Although this sounds like a far cry from today's understanding of who Santa is, Morrison's take still embodies the character's essential elements. He's a Robin Hood-style champion of the oppressed, who fights to help the people of Grimsvig, who have been subjugated by the villainous Lord Magnus. Throughout the initial 7-issue story, not only deliver toys to the children of Grimsvig, but also become a hero for its citizens to look up to and rally around, reviving the spirit of Yuletide after Magnus had outlawed it. Morrison and Mora's rendition returns Klaus to his folklore roots and creates a distinctly mythic and heroic version, someone who wouldn't feel out of place alongside King Arthur, John Henry, or even Superman himself. It's a powerful story by one of the all-time great comic book writers that, alongside bringing a darker and grittier edge to Santa's origin, reminds us of the important values at the core of this festive tradition: compassion, empathy, and togetherness. I'm a massive fan of Klaus, and rereading it recently to get myself into the Christmas spirit reminded me of just how great this series is. I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't yet checked it out, and I should note that the success of the original miniseries has led to a handful of one-shot sequel books being released, which all build on the mythology established in the first story and create a fully realised and lived-in world for this unique version of Santa. If this video proves one thing, it's that Santa Claus is a character who not only appears in so many comics, but shares many of the same traits as a lot of Marvel and DC's other iconic heroes. He's incredibly adaptable, able to be reimagined in almost any context, but still manages to retain a set of values, principles, and iconography that makes him instantly recognisable and familiar in whatever form he appears in. And through studying the history of Santa's comic book appearances, we see the medium itself grow and evolve around him into what it is today. As strange as it sounds, Santa has been there for every step of the way, from the humble beginnings of the Golden Age, all the way to the dark deconstructions of the 1980s and 90s, and even to the modern age of comics that we have now. Not only that, but almost every major comic book publisher has a catalogue of great Santa or Christmas-focused comics, meaning that regardless of which characters, setting, or style you may prefer, there's truly something for everyone to dive into and enjoy. I hope this video shines a light on the fascinating history of Santa-themed comics, and above all else, I hope it gave you some valuable and useful recommendations for stories to enjoy over the holidays. So with all of that said, I want to end this video by simply saying stay safe, and from me and everyone else involved in this video, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on this video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know your thoughts on everything we touched on in today's video. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to Owen Likes Comics, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notify bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you enjoyed this video and you want some more, there should be some other videos on screen right now that you might also enjoy. If you want to help support the channel and help me make more videos, you can do so by going to patreon.com/OwenLikesComics. Or if you just want some more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, just at Owen Likes Comics. I want to give a big special thanks to all the other wonderful creators who joined me in this video. I really appreciate them taking time out of their busy festive schedule to take part in this really fun and enjoyable project. I will leave links to everyone's channels and socials in the description, so if there's any creators there that you're not already following, be sure to head on over and check out some of their other videos and subscribe. They're all wonderful, wonderful people. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and a lovely New Year, and I will see you all next time. But until then, take care and keep reading.